On a recent trip to Jamaica, Montego Bay specifically, and even more specific, St James Parish, as I walked around with my Canadian funeral director antenna on, I noticed this small, roughly 2-acre cemetery on this busy road as the buses and cabs and tourists streamed by. It sat here quietly with no name, no plaque, obviously untouched for some time. I became kind of fixated on it, did a little bit of local research with some news articles, talking with some local people, and came to learn a little bit about the story of this particular place. It's remarkable how the history of the past and the present and cultures all crashing together in this one place. Here's a bit of the story. Today I'm in the Cholera Cemetery. Yes, the Cholera Cemetery is what it's often referred to as. Some refer to it as the Jewish Cemetery. I'm right in the middle of St. James, Montego Bay, Jamaica. The Cholera Cemetery is a common story in urban centers. Here I am in a very, very busy part of Montego Bay, Jamaica. A lot of tourism going on. And right in the middle of it is a little cemetery that my understanding is has not been used in over 100 years, but it's right in prime real estate. I'm surrounded by busy streets, but the cemetery itself has become, well, let's just say run down. You can see over my shoulder there's power lines that have sort of fallen down. They're laying on the ground here. There's some kind of a cistern system, but the cemetery itself is definitely abandoned. There's a municipal drainage area that runs right directly through the center of the cemetery, draining the rainwater into the bay. And also in large urban areas, not surprising, there's some ingenious folks that have figured out how to live here. A little bit of research I've done in the area has kind of revealed a classic story of a cemetery born out of necessity, was placed here in this part of a growing urban area 100 years ago. It survived a cholera epidemic where many cholera victims are buried here. And of course, with the history of Jamaica, a combination of Asian, Indian, and African, you'll see graves such as this one, which has some type of, I'm no expert, but some type of Japanese characters on it here. And its own style of grave, where others, the grave right beside, they are in different states of disrepair. The writing on many of the graves is remarkably legible. Many of the dates going back to the late 1800s. I saw some in the early 20s. Incredible. Directly behind the wall behind me here is Montego Bay. If I was to step on that wall, we'd be looking directly at Montego Bay, which leads to the Caribbean Sea. And again, with an urban center like this, a busy place, sadly, as over my shoulder here, this particular resort has at times just thrown the garbage over the wall. From the articles I've read, the municipal government here has taken over ownership of the cemetery, almost like a public park, but obviously doing nothing with it. But again, it's prime area for parking. So the thinking is that this will eventually become a parking lot. In Canada, there's such a thing as moving a cemetery. It happened in Dresden years ago. It happens all over the place. In Canada, we have regulations and guidelines, and the moving of a cemetery is a big deal. Here in Jamaica, it's also a big deal, but the mechanisms are very different. There may necessarily not be archaeologists involved and coroners, and it's very possible that this cemetery, this abandoned cemetery, may just be bulldozed over. Of course, the concerns are many. You've got one genealogical folk saying, if we get rid of the cemetery, how are people going to find evidence of their past? Other people saying, wait a minute, there were some mass graves in here when the cholera epidemic hit 100 years ago. Are we going to unearth some disease? A lot of debate, a lot of discussion, and years go by, and this little gem just remains untouched. Definitely evidence of it fits and starts. People have come to clean up the area, cleaning off areas, but again, without the will to, and the money, and the interest, these places are essentially doomed to become whatever history makes them into. As we've got this piece of history here. So if you're wondering how I got in here, well, I just hopped the fence, and a gentleman had just told me he's going to give me the real story of this cemetery. He said the locals would say no living thing comes in here and comes out alive. So I might be disproving that a little bit there, but what an interesting part of my vacation.